Recently, Nintendo decided to revive the Wii Sports franchise with Nintendo Switch Sports. Unfortunately, that game turned out to be not so great, so I thought it would be fun to revisit the real sequel to Wii Sports, Wii Sports Resort. I'm going to be blunt, this game is way better than Switch Sports. Everyone is a Mii. All the activities take place on this huge, cool island, but best of all, there are a ton of sports to play. Today, I'm going to review each of these sports, while giving them a score out of 3 for 3 different categories. First, I'll judge how good the gameplay is. Basically, is it fun to play? I will also consider how easy it is to pick up, and how much room there is for improving your skills. Second, I will consider how well they implemented the multiplayer. Multiplayer is a super important part of Wii Sports, so it deserves its own category. For the most part, I will give a sport a better score if it supports simultaneous multiplayer, and a lower score if it makes you take turns, which, if I'm being honest, isn't much different than playing single player. Last, I will make sure to gauge how much content the sport offers. Some sports offer completely different game modes, while others are much more lacking in that department. At the end, I'll compare the scores and rank every sport in Wii Sports Resort. Are you ready? Let's dive in. I'll be going in the order that they appear on the menu. First, we have Swordplay. One amazing one to start us off. This sport includes 3 modes: Duel, Speed Slice, and Showdown. In all 3, the main idea is to use your Wii Remote as a sword. You'll have to use it to swing at your opponent, or use it to block attacks. If your attack is blocked, you'll be stunned and unable to swing your sword for a few seconds. This core gameplay is enough to get a score of 3, and I haven't even gotten into the game mode. It's super simple to pick up, but you also have to learn to swing in the right direction so that your attacks aren't blocked, which makes for really exciting gameplay. In duel mode, you fight against someone else or a computer in a ring way above the ocean. Dramatic, huh? Speed Slice has 2 people racing to slice an object that Matt throws at you, but making sure to slice in the correct direction, or you won't get the point. Showdown is a single-player adventure that has you traversing all over Woohoo Island, facing down hordes of enemies, with just your trusty sword, and only 3 hit points per round. All 3 of these games knock it out of the park. Swordplay earns an easy 3 in terms of content. Not only are there 3 game modes, but the Showdown mode in particular has 10 unique stations, which could also be played in reverse, adding up to 20. Multiplayer also earns a 3 here. Swordplay is one of the few sports to include 2 separate game modes that can be played with simultaneous multiplayer, and they are both a blast. Swordplay earns the score of 9 out of 9 points. Next up is wakeboarding. For this game, you simply shake the Wii Remote when going over the wake to go as high as possible, then keep the remote flat so that you land safely on the water. I have a lot of fun memories from this sport. The encouraging whoas and nice airs were really fun to hear, and it was really satisfying to land a high jump and get a bunch of points. It's pretty simple, but can actually be quite difficult to land, especially on harder courses. The gameplay gets a 3. Despite my nostalgia though, it doesn't have much else going for it. Multiplayer is really bad here. Each person takes a couple of minutes to wakeboard before going to the next. It's one of the worst implementations of multiplayer in the game, so it gets a score of 1. Wakeboarding also doesn't have much variety. There's only 1 gameplay mode, and it's just 3 courses. Content gets a score of 1. Wakeboarding ultimately gets a score of 5. Keep in mind that a low score isn't bad, it's really just a comparison with the other, hopefully even better sports. Next, we have Frisbee. There are 2 modes here, Frisbee Dog and Frisbee Golf. Both of you swing the Wii Remote like a Frisbee. Each mode has you throwing towards some kind of target. In Frisbee Dog, you only get 1 throw per target, and the dog will catch the Frisbee. There are 10 targets, with the leader ones having balloons for you to pop. The golf plays similar to the standalone golf game, even using the same maps. I'm not a big fan of the gameplay here. It's supposed to be intuitive how to throw the frisbee,
but I've played frisbee catch for my whole life, and it's nothing like this. Maybe it's just me, but I can never get the throws to go where I want. For such a frustrating sport, the gameplay gets a score of 1. Multiplayer also isn't so good here. You take turns, and for frisbee dog, each person gets 5 throws before it switches players. With 4 people, that could take 15 turns before it's yours. Golf isn't as bad in theory, but when you get a bad throw, you have to throw again until your frisbee isn't the farthest away anymore, which can make it take a while before it's someone's turn. In fact, it takes longer for people who play better. Multiplayer gets a score of 1. The one saving grace for frisbee is the content. There are 2 modes, and while frisbee dog is a bit underwhelming, golf is a whopping 21 courses, so that will keep you busy for a while. Content gets a score of 3, and a total score of 5. A really good concept, ruined by poor controls. With 2 sports with a score of 5, things aren't looking so good for Wii Sports Resort. Let's see if the next one is better. Archery is our next sport. Our first game on the list to use the nunchuck. You hold the Wii remote like a bow, pull the arrow back with the nunchuck, aim toward the target, and shoot. It was always fun to try to perfectly aim for that bullseye. The motion controls are simple enough that it's easy to accurately aim, yet it's difficult to consistently get a good score, since there's not much room for error. The gameplay here gets an easy score of 3. Multiplayer, unfortunately, isn't so good. You take turns to shoot the targets. Seeing a pattern here, each person gets 3 shots before switching, which isn't too bad, so it gets a score of 2. Archery doesn't have much content, with only 1 main game mode. There are 3 difficulties with 3 targets each. That only gets a score of 1, for a total of 6. That's pretty good, though not much better than the last 2. On to sport number 5.
Basketball has always been one of my favorites. There are 2 modes here. 3-point challenge just has you making a bunch of 3-point shots, using motion controls to shoot. It's alright, but it's pretty repetitive, and the multiplayer is barely relevant. You guessed it, it's taking turns. Now, the real highlight here is the pickup game. Here, 2 players take control of a team of 3. Your Mii will always be the captain, but your teammates will be random Miis from your system. It's always fun to see who they will be. The goal is to score more points in a few minutes. You'll get to pass to your teammates, steal the ball, shoot, and block shots. There's some strategy too. Do you try to dribble towards the middle for a slam dunk? Do you risk the ball being stolen? Or do you shoot from the outside in hopes for a 3-pointer? The game controls great, using a mix of button and motion controls. It's not perfect. The shooting can be inconsistent at times, making you miss a shot for seemingly no good reason. Overall though, everything comes together to make one of the most competitive games in Wii Sports Resort. Multiplayer and gameplay both get a 3. There's honestly barely any content here though. There's just 2 modes with no more variety, so let's get a score of 1. Basketball overall gets a score of 7. Number 6 is table tennis, a successor to tennis from Wii Sports. Like tennis, you swing the Wii remote to hit the ball with your paddle, though unlike tennis, you have much more control. You can't just swing the remote wildly anymore, but you can spin the ball and aim much more accurately. The gameplay is super simple and satisfying, yet leaves room for improvement, especially if you play ping pong in real life too. The gameplay gets a score of 3. There are 2 modes here, an endless return challenge and a regular match. Both play similarly, you just need to hit the ball back when it comes to you. The multiplayer isn't great for the return challenge. You might as well take turns playing it in single player. But match mode has you playing against each other, which is a ton of fun. Multiplayer gets a score of 3. Unfortunately, there is not much content for this game, so let's get a score of 1 here. Table tennis with a score of 7 is really fun, but a missed opportunity in terms of variety. Golf is our next returning sport, and this time it plays just like the original, though the motion controls have been improved. In this game, you aim the golf club, get into position, and swing the remote. I'd say it controls fine. It'll usually go in the direction you want, but the motion controls can feel inconsistent, and you really have to hold the remote straight if you don't want the ball to curve. It's better than frisbees, but I'd still only give the gameplay a score of 2. Multiplayer here is so-so. You take turns, but it doesn't usually take too long in between turns, so multiplayer gets a score of 2. Lastly, golf has a good amount of content. There's 21 holes, which may seem like a lot, but there are no alternative modes, just normal golf. Even Wii Sports had training modes, but this is nothing else. Golf gets a content score of 2, for a total score of 6. Pretty average sport in all the categories. It's not bad or terrific in any of the categories. Let's see how the next one does. Bowling also returns from Wii Sports with improved motion controls. This time though, it comes with 2 extra modes, spin control and 100 pin. The gameplay here is spot on. You can control the exact direction and spin of the ball, and throwing it feels perfect, and quite realistic. And of course, you can throw the balls backwards. 1 point Wii Sports Resort, 0 Nintendo Switch Sports. Like golf, you have to make sure to keep the remote straight unless you want to spin, which you often want to do in spin control mode. In that mode, the lane is covered in obstacles, which change every round. It's a fun way to shake up the gameplay and test your bowling skills. In 100 pin mode, you need to, of course, knock down 100 pins. It plays just like normal bowling, but it's honestly just more satisfying to knock down 100 pins than just 10. Gameplay gets a score of 3. I was tempted to give the content a score of 3 too, because it also has 3 modes, but you only really need to play each of them once to experience everything, so it only gets a 2. The multiplayer here is average. You take turns, but this is one of the shortest wait times, since each round only takes 1 or 2 throws, so it gets a score of 2. Bowling overall is a 7-point game. Nice. Looks like these scores are picking up. Cruising onto our last row of sports. Power cruising is another sport with a nunchuck. The gameplay here gets a score of 1. Here, you tilt the controllers to steer your jet cruise. Pretty simple, so why did the gameplay get such a low score? Well, for one, it's just uncomfortable to hold the Wii remote and nunchuck in front of you the whole time. The controls don't always go where you want them to, and it just feels relatively sloppy. It's not bad, really, but definitely one of the worst controlled games. It's still fun to drive through the rings, but it would be nice if there were less frequent misses. There are 2 modes here, Slalom Course and Versus. Both of you driving through rings, one by yourself and one is with a friend. In Versus, you play at the same time, and while you're basically doing the same thing as a Slalom Course, you can bump into each other, and you have to race to the finish. Even if it doesn't add much, multiplayer is an automatic 3. That's a fair amount of content, with 2 separate modes that are on 6 courses. I'd say that gets it a score of 2. Overall, Power Cruising gets a score of 6. A lot of what I said about power cruising applies to canoeing as well. Both are water sports, with a single boat and versus mode. Instead of tilting the controller to steer, now you move it like you're rowing. Like cruising, it works fine, but it's just annoying to turn sometimes. It's just like actual canoeing, so it makes sense and I can't really complain, but that doesn't mean I find it fun. Versus mode works like before, where you race to the finish, but the speed challenge, interestingly, doesn't have you take turns. Instead, you share a boat and must work together to reach the finish. On the other hand, canoeing has only 3 difficulty options. I'd give canoeing the exact same score as power cruising. A 1 for gameplay, 3 for multiplayer, and 2 for content. A 6 overall. Next up, we have cycling. I always thought of it as an interesting sport. On the one hand, it all boils down to shaking the Wii remote and nunchuck back and forth, which can get tiring. Here's the thing though, it tires your character too. You have to strategically pedal only when needed, and try to position yourself behind someone else so you get a draft boost. While not perfect, I found the gameplay to be pretty fun, so it gets a score of 2. Like canoeing, cycling offers both a co-op and versus multiplayer mode, so it gets a score of 3. Lastly, it has a lot of content. There are 6 unique racetracks positioned all throughout Uhu Island. The locations feel much more distinctive than the power cruising courses, and it's really cool to explore different parts of the island. Plus, you also have the choice between doing one course at a time, or doing a whole Grand Prix where you go all 3 or all 6 of them at once. Content here gets a score of 3. Cycling gets a score of 8. Honestly, I was not expecting cycling to get such a high score. I always liked it, but it was never one of my favorites. Maybe I'll have to rethink that. Finally, we have one of my favorites in the game, air sports. Will it be enough to top swordplay? Here we have 3 completely different modes: skydiving, island flyover, and dogfight. Skydiving has you jumping out of a plane. You need to tilt your Wii remote to grab onto other divers and face towards the camera to take a picture. At the end, you need to aim yourself to fall through some rings, and then aim everyone for one last photo before you take out your parachutes. I've always loved this game, if only because it looks so fun to skydive. I might not feel sporty, but it was always a relaxing and fun experience. Next, we have island flyover, which is so different that it should arguably be a different sport altogether. Here, you fly a plane over Woohoo Island searching for eye points, which give you a bit of information about the landmarks you see. It's so fun to just explore the island where everything takes place. Like skydiving, I just find this to be super relaxing. The controls here are simple. Just tilt the remote where you want to go. Even if they weren't so great, it wouldn't matter so much because you don't have to play perfectly. Just go where you want and enjoy yourself. Finally, we have air sports only a multiplayer mode, dogfight. It controls like island flyover, but this time the goal is to pop your opponent's balloons before they pop yours. You could also try to fly to certain points on the map to replenish your balloons, but be careful. Crashing will make you lose half of your stock. This game is really fun, though there is one flaw. You could shake the remote forward to give yourself a boost, but there's no cooldown for this, so every game tends to boil down to shaking the remote over and over again, which gets annoying after a while. Still, a really fun mode of a terrific sport. Air Sports gets a perfect 9 points. Now for the ranking. I'll list each sport from the lowest to the highest score. In case of a tie, I'll prioritize gameplay, because that's the most important part of any game, whether or not it's fun to play. Without further ado, we have 12. Frisbee. For the worst game of them all, I still really enjoyed it, when it worked. 11. Wakeboarding. Satisfying to play, but super bare bones. 10. Canoeing. It's alright, but nothing special. 9. Power cruising. Tied with canoeing for score, but I just found it slightly more fun. 8. Golf. It's pretty good, and I really enjoy it, but it wasn't very exciting. 7. Archery. Honestly, a terrific sport, so it just goes to show how much better the rest are. 6. Bowling. Such classic fun, it's no wonder it's appeared in every game in the sports series. 5. Table tennis. Hitting the ball back and forth feels really fluid. 4. Basketball. This tied with table tennis, but I gave basketball the edge because of how much more depth the pickup game has. 3. Cycling. I wouldn't have expected this to place so high, but it's held up surprisingly well. Now to rank the 2 sports that have gotten perfect scores, air sports and swordplay. Both have amazing gameplay, multiplayer, and content, so how do I decide which one is better? I've decided to add one last category to settle this: multiplayer gameplay. I'll consider how well the gameplay holds up even in the multiplayer, pretty much. In air sports, the only multiplayer mode is dogfight, and I find the gameplay there to be fun but lacking. Having to constantly push the remote forward really dampens the experience for me. Swordplay, on the other hand, has 2 multiplayer modes, and they're both implemented perfectly, in my opinion. Both dual and speed slice feel very precise with the swinging controls, and they still feel very competitive. Air sports, while an amazing sport, gets the rank of number 2. Number 1 goes to swordplay. With 3 different amazing game modes with great controls, it was no surprise that this would be the best sport here. Looking back though, I found that every sport here was great in some way. I will always love Wii Sports Resort, not just for the nostalgia, but for the great games it had to offer. Thanks for watching this pointless video. I wanted to see what it was like to make a YouTube video, and it's a lot of work, but it's pretty fun too. make sure to like and subscribe. Or not. It's not like I'm actually going to start a channel from this. Or am I? I would love to see your thoughts in the comments though. Have a great day.